Historically Speaking, an online YouTube history channel focused on the history of various institutions and professionals, how history intersects with education, culture, the world around us, and technology. I'm Karen Yang, host of Historically Speaking. Today, joining us is Roger Weiss, who is the tech integration lead at the International Space Station and within the NASA Johnson Space Center. And he has 20 plus years experience in the International Space Station programs, research and technology operations, and other programs within NASA as well. We'll also be talking about the Space Station Research and Technology, which has also just really done a lot of unprecedented work in just human endeavors to really understand space and is another really integral part of NASA as well. Roger, is there anything else you'd like to add about your bio or anything else to add about the space station research and technology?
Yeah, I think it would be important for me to note to everyone that I am a contractor. NASA comprises civil servants who work directly for the government, directly for NASA.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is the other contingency of us who are contractors. We work for private companies or commercial firms who bid on solicitations that come out from NASA and hopefully win that contract. And then we work as part of the contract. So I'm a contract with Barrios Technology, which is a local firm here in Houston, although we have some folks in other NASA centers, a few other NASA centers. But so I am now part of what's called the Human Spaceflight Technical Integration Contract, long acronym HSFTIC, that really is predominantly at Johnson Space Center. There's a few others at Marshall and others. And we are supporting human spaceflight programs. So ideally the International Space Station, the Commercial Crew Program, the Orion program, and we also support the Gateway program and Artemis. So I have been working with Space Station, the International Space Station, as a contractor really just about since its inception, since it was just born, and kind of grew up with it, and predominantly in the research area, that is to say communications for the research area, all the science and technology that gets operated on Space Station. I've been supporting that with an incredibly talented team.
That is so great that you kind of mentioned how you've been with the International Space Station since basically its inception. And that's like something that leads perfectly into our first question. You seem to be the perfect person to ask about the history of the space station and its research and technology.
Well, boy, there's so much behind it. As far as the early space flight, with the Sputnik and the Explorer satellite. As soon as we were able to put some kind of instrument in space, it really gave scientists an opportunity to acquire all kinds of data and new information about the solar system, the universe, and get that information that would have otherwise been really unobtainable. So doing space science added a whole new dimension for quest for knowledge. And so as soon as we were able to launch humans into space, like Yuri Gagarin in 1961, and then Alan Shepard, first American, and started sending humans up, there was a whole range of human experiments that we wanted to do, human research, if you will, and understand how gravity or weightlessness, if you will, impacts the human body, because we knew we wanted to keep progressing with spaceflight and sending humans. But up until then, we were sending all kinds of there were creatures being sent up, living creatures. And a lot of people are familiar with the primates that went up, and we U.S. sent up a lot of chimps, before they got to send humans, just to make sure things went as well as possible, see any impacts on the human body and systems. But I mean, the other countries were conducting experiments. I mean, Japan and China and Canada and India and the USSR before Russia, European countries. So, in all those countries, all the experiments taking place really had a lot of different disciplines that people are familiar with today. Eventually, the United States sent up its first space station. It was called Skylab. It was part of the Apollo program after we landed 12 people on the moon. They migrated into, transitioned into using those huge modules as a spacecraft to have these humans go up and live in space a little bit longer and conduct microgravity experiments. So that was a permanent, that was the only space station we had. It was in the 70s. But it was the funding was canceled for it. Eventually, the Russians, they had their own Salyut space station, and then they had the Mir space station, which was like the predecessor to the International Space Station. And eventually, the United States had the space shuttle. We sent up American astronauts, NASA astronauts, to dock and cooperate with the Russians, and they conducted experiments on all kinds of multidisciplinary experiments, very similar ones that we do today, but some early on. And eventually Mir was deorbited, and then we came along and started the International Space Station in the very late 90s, with the first elements going up, and it took several flights. So it's important to note that space station took about 11 years to construct. So the first decade was really about assembly and the installation of what are called research racks, or the racks that would hold the science experiment hardware, where the astronauts would utilize all these different types of components. And so that first decade was, about construction and assembly, and that space station coming together for the first time, all these huge parts in space, until it grew as big as an NFL football field. And that's really what's in orbit now. And then the second decade, early on in that first decade, it wasn't like we weren't doing science. We were actually doing a few experiments as soon as we had what's called Expedition 1. Even before humans came up, we were doing some protein crystal growth. And then they sent the first crew, which was called Expedition 1 in 2000 until early 2001. And they did a few experiments. So there was crew Earth observations, taking a lot of pictures of the Earth and the protein crystal growth, but they were always testing the impact of weightlessness or microgravity on the human body. What's going to happen to the bones? What's going to happen to the muscles, with eyesight and visual acuity and whatnot. As well as all that hardware testing and making sure the systems were good. So the first decade we did a little bit of science, and then the second decade, once that space station was fully assembled and the space shuttle stopped flying in 2011, the next decade became about full utilization of the space station. It was made, its vision, its purpose, its objective was to be a world-class orbiting laboratory. And so there are 15 nations peacefully collaborating on the International Space Station. You got the United States, you have Russia, Japan, Canada, and then there are the number of nations in the European Space Agency, so that consortium. And each of them have, except Canada, each of them have a laboratory, their own laboratory that they designed and built and sent up. And so there are different kinds of capabilities and facilities in each of those labs which are about the size of Greyhound bus or so. I mean, it's a little bigger,
Whoa.
but there are racks all around, and there's no floor or ceiling. And so all these different systems, they were agreed on, they were negotiated, all these nations are negotiated what would be the disciplines that we would kind of categorize, so that we
Mm-hmm.
can understand and bucket these data and understand over time all the objectives, what type of experiments need to be done. But they all negotiated on using each other's, which they still do today, using each other's labs, using
Mm-hmm.
each other's facilities and components, and capabilities within each of these labs. So
Mm-hmm.
that was the second decade. Now we're still doing it, and more than 3,000 experiments have been done and are still being
Wow.
done. In any given mission, which usually lasts, a crew goes up for anywhere from, approximately 6 months. It's called either an expedition or an increment, and they conduct these experiments. So in any given expedition or increment where a new crew is up, there'll be about 200 to 300 experiments taking place. Some are
Wow.
self-run, and some the crew has to operate. And they get trained, of course, on Earth, or they're having on-the-job training for refreshing themselves on how to conduct these experiments. They're all based on principal investigators on Earth all over the world. Principal investigator, fancy name for scientist. And
Yeah.
then there are implementation partners or payload developers. Those are the people building the hardware that will house these experiments. So the scientist has a vision. I want to accomplish this up in
Mm-hmm.
space. Okay, payload developer, how do we do that? All right, well,
Mm-hmm.
here's how we'll build it, and here are the requirements we have to comply with for NASA, and how to integrate into the space station and make sure it's safe, the
Mm-hmm.
vehicle safe, the crew is safe, the
Mm-hmm.
mission safe, the payload safe. So that's a lot of what's taking place. So this third decade now that we just began, we celebrated 20 years of human habitation
Mm-hmm.
continuous in November 2020. That was
Mm-hmm.
20-year anniversary. So we're already
Wow.
past that. We're in the third decade now that we're
Yeah.
calling the decade of results. We're still doing science, but now some of those results of
Are coming
long-term
in. Mm-hmm.
results are starting to come down. Some have already descended and been brought back to their researchers, but there are more results and tangible technology transfer into industry, into public society and whatnot that are coming to fruition. So I was mentioning the type of science to you before that were kind of disciplines that were agreed upon. So all the partners kind of agreed that it would be biology and biotechnology,
Mm-hmm.
earth and space science, human research, physical science, technology demonstration and development, and then
Mm-hmm.
educational and cultural activities too. Not necessarily science all the time, or
Mm-hmm.
technology, but
Mm-hmm.
there are cultural activities. For example, an astronaut might read a book, a children's book in space. It's called Storytime in Space. It's one of the most
Wow,
successful
that's so cool.
um, uh, uh, payloads, if you will, that we have up there. Or the astronauts will be can do a downlink by video or by ham radio with students all over the world. So
Wow, that's
a lot of
crazy.
different things taking place. Um, does that give a good kind of history? Do you have any other
Yeah,
follow-up questions on that?
that definitely does. I really liked how you structured and kind of broke it down. Probably like the official structure of like, oh, decade one was like much more assembly, decade two being kind of putting in the research and putting in the work, and decade three kind of seeing some of those research results come into fruition, just kind of reflecting on that, which is super, super cool. Like, I really enjoyed how definitely like throughout it all, I think the sense of the International Space Station is how it's international and how a lot of collaboration is needed between these different nations, both in history and in today as well. And I also loved how you brought up the different kind of sections or different research kind of opportunities or research kind of um, segments, I guess, on the International Space Station also include like education and cultural based activities as well. I definitely would have really loved if like an astronaut communicated with me in space, like in class. I think that would have really been like another top tier like science kind of moment or science class moment as well. And I think that that is super, super cool. And I personally did not even really know of like before the International Space Station that different nations were already kind of sending their own things off into space and having this kind of dialogue or having these kind of ideas of maybe forming something new together.
Yes, yes. It's considered the if I say ISS, you'll know that I mean that's an acronym for International Space Station. And the ISS has been an engineering achievement, we like to say. I mean, it's one of the most complex and humongous engineering achievements
Mm-hmm.
in the history of humanity. Those parts were all designed, of course, on Earth, but they were brought together for the first time going around the Earth 17,500 miles per hour, winging around in orbit and brought together in low Earth orbit about 200 kilometers up for the first time and and
Mm-hmm.
and and, and assembled together. So it's astounding. Then there's that scientific achievement that
Mm-hmm.
we're doing all this remarkable science that is intended to benefit humanity on Earth, but it also has a dual function to hopefully benefit further exploration
Mm-hmm.
into for future deep space missions to explore the solar
Yeah.
system. I mean, we're going to go back to the moon hopefully in a couple of years, then onto Mars and to live, for a 3-year total mission or so,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe other planets. So there's technology we're doing and science we're doing that'll all benefit future space missions. And then you brought up a very good point. The partners. I think I mentioned two legacies already, the engineering and science, but for me personally, I think the greatest legacy is that you brought 15 nations together
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
cooperate. A couple of them former enemies. I mean, look, we were at war with Russia, the Cold War, which was the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
and then with Japan, and here we are now. We've overcome political and social and language barriers
Mm-hmm.
and cultural barriers or obstacles, all these obstacles to come together
Mm-hmm.
and create this phenomenal world-class laboratory in
Yeah.
orbit. And they become very close, and people are working with each other all over the globe to keep this station safe and keep it producing and keep it operating. um, but we did it peacefully. It's such
Mm-hmm.
a great example. So we're going to go on to the moon and into Mars, onto Mars eventually. The United States isn't going to do it alone. I mean,
Yeah,
we
for
have
sure.
to collaborate. So what better template than this 20 plus years of international station that we hope to go to about 2030 or
Mm-hmm.
so. Um, it's been a phenomenal boilerplate for achievement, significant achievement by humans to overcome all those obstacles.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when you were talking about how, the International Space Station in a way brought together these former enemies to really create something and further, research and also further our own understandings of ourselves, I was also thinking how a lot of times for me personally too, and we were talking about this before the interview with, the idea of like humanities or communication in NASA beyond, just engineering or technology being the focus. A lot of times, at least for me, sometimes I don't really think that science, can really overcome political hurdles or really unite people culturally or kind of overcome those kind of more what we would normally think that, like reading or culture might be able to provide us with the solutions with. I didn't really think that science and technology could be really this like really great unifying factor. But definitely the International Space Station is a really, really good example of the science's power and technology's power in bringing together different perspectives and bringing together different cultures to really, work towards a common goal, which is super, super cool too.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Karen, and it's probably be a good time to plug one of our latest communications products, because
Hmm.
we've done 4 of these over time, over the past 20 years. In our 4th
Hmm.
edition, it's called the International Space Station Benefits for Humanity. And
Hmm.
what it is essentially is a huge compilation of a number of significant experiments, or investigations, we call them, that have been conducted by the crews, developed by NASA, developed by the partners, international partners, some in collaboration, some not, but all different types of disciplines, and
Hmm.
how these experiments have benefited life on Earth in terms
Hmm.
of the different scientific disciplines, and people's lives, and water, for example, uh, uh, filtration of water and recycling of water,
Hmm.
making clean water, protein crystal growth for drug delivery and health benefits
Hmm.
in the human body. There's so many different kind of benefits for humanity, and so many different disciplines. But we put this. It's a book that we put
Hmm.
out. I know that you're going to probably be asking, where you can get further information, and I'll give you some links
Yes, that'd be great.
later that you can kind of share with your viewers to
Hmm.
look at this. But it's an excellent compilation to understand, because a lot of people still don't know about the International Space Station, even though we've
Hmm.
been up there 22 plus years. Some don't understand why it's there.
Hmm.
What's it doing? Why have you spent billions of dollars in this? What's going on up there? So
Hmm.
this is a chance to kind of justify its existence in a very
Hmm.
sophisticated and beneficial manner, to let
Hmm.
people know what's in it for them. Why are United States paying citizens paying taxes, all these big taxes to NASA? What's going on? What is this station doing?
Hmm.
So it's a very good publication. Has a lot of good rationale, and it's easy to read, and visually beautiful.
That's awesome. That kind of brings me to my last question, which is, do you have any, like, how can the public really tune into, I guess, the International Space Station, and its activities, I guess, or like get involved however they can?
Yeah, there's so many different ways, and there's different audiences too. So for the general public, I mean, we we put a lot of time and effort into trying to communicate about, as I mentioned, about the science, about the technology, about space station in understandable terms, because it can be very complex. So one of my roles on the team is to manage a number of the websites and web pages on nasa.gov that have to do with research and technology.
Hmm.
And so I'll send you these links, but one of them, for example, to start out, we start people off on nasa.gov/ISS-science. And it's kind of like a landing page it's like a veritable table of contents, setting the stage for all the different elements and areas that you could read about.
Hmm.
So someone can learn. There's a link for the latest research news. So we're updating about experiments every day. What's on station? What are
Hmm.
the highlights at the end of the week? What's going up on the next resupply mission? What's going up with the next crew? What's coming down for those spacecraft that can return results?
Hmm.
What are the benefits? Um, and then that's another page. So the one I just mentioned was nasa.gov/station research news. So that'll get you your latest news. Then we have nasa.gov/station benefits. So
Hmm.
that page has all about the benefits for humanity that I was just explaining, and
Hmm.
beautiful videos, incredibly beautiful videos that were produced, The whole book is downloadable in PDF form. There's a brochure. There's some podcasts all about the research. So that's about the benefits of space, space station research that you can listen to. That's
Mm-hmm.
another place. Then you have a group of people that are interested in, well, gosh, how do I get involved? Whether it's a scientist, some technologist, someone in industry. We're trying to grow the low Earth orbit economy. We're trying to um, do more with what we have on the space station and past that. So we
Mm-hmm.
do have what's called nasa.gov/station opportunities. And that's where someone can go who's interested in, well, how do I get my project up there? Hey, I have an idea. I want to do some science. Or, hey, I'm a student. Can I submit an idea for a project? So
Mm-hmm.
that page gives all different types of opportunities and where there's solicitations can be found. Um, Open source science opportunities. And then there's one called nasa.gov/station experiments. It's a huge database of every experiment we've ever done, a
Oh
summary
my
of it,
gosh.
imagery, videos, who are the principal investigators, who's the partner that's sponsoring, who is the sponsoring agency or organization, and then a kind of summary, the Earth benefits for humanity, the space deep space benefits. That's another one. So then we have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. It comes free into your email every
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday. It's kind of a compilation of the week's past research news. We're on Twitter. There's a Twitter for ISS research, which is
Mm-hmm.
at ISS_research. And that
Mm-hmm.
is all about research on ISS. And then there's a Facebook page that deals with ISS in general. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes our research is highlighted, or it's not dedicated to science, but because that's its purpose, and much of it is devoted to that. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's a really cool app called it's called the Space Station Research Explorer, SSRX, not E. And it's at nasa.gov/station research app. And you can download this app for free and put it on your mobile, on your iPad, or on your tablet or your phone. And really, it has most of the content that I was just describing you from those different areas, on videos and research news and
Mm-hmm.
benefits for humanity and opportunities and experiments to look up. And it's right at your fingertips. So that's a way to engage. And you'll see actually on Instagram too, there's a number of our folks that are producing beautiful reels on Instagram.
Oh,
So that'll
yeah.
yeah. And occasionally there's a LinkedIn, So again, it depends. And then I should mention for students who are interested, there's a whole page that they can go to that's called nasa.gov/STEM on station. One word,
Mm-hmm.
STEM on station, for all these STEM students who are interested in opportunities, or educators that are interested in lessons plans and how to teach about the science and technology on space station to their students. So that's some ways to engage, and I'm happy to send this list to you if you want.
Yes. No
We're all
worries.
over YouTube,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
The last thing I just want to mention to you is that I know that there's interest in what's going on in the future. How long is space station going to last? What's going to happen after?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we're trying to get to the moon and to Mars with the Artemis program, but still in the low Earth orbit domain, which is where space station is. It's only 200 kilometers up, going around the Earth every every 90 minutes, so the crew can see 16 sunsets and sunrises a day.
Oh my God.
Um, we're trying to continue life and activity in low Earth orbit. So there's a new program called the Commercial Low Earth Orbit Destinations. And those are some private companies who are intending to, and they propose to build their own smaller space stations for science, for in space production applications, for entertainment, for whatever. to take more advantage of that and keep it as a thriving business that needs to
Mm-hmm.
grow in that low Earth orbit economy. So we want to have something continuing in low Earth orbit once we deorbit ISS. And
Mm-hmm.
these private companies, there are 3 or 4 of them that have visions already to build these small stations that
Mm-hmm.
will take on that incredible activity and continuation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of these resources. Um, our time is actually kind of running super short. So I'm just going to end it here, but all of these resources will be linked into the chat, into the Dropbox down below. So feel free to check them out. Definitely a lot of really great opportunities. But thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.